Alright, continuing on with part 2 of the Revolutionary War. Where we left off, the Battle of Lexington and Concord had just happened. The British were driven back to the safety of the city of Boston. The only inland route was effectively cut off by the colonists that they'd occupy the land south, and militiamen from all across New England are going to start heading to Boston. No one's really formally leading them yet. They kind of just are a bunch of ragtag soldiers, but they are massively outnumbering the British, so they're basically stuck in Boston. Now, because of their naval supremacy, though, they're able to ship in supplies at their whim, so the British could have essentially stayed in Boston indefinitely, and the colonists wanted to force them out. So their next move was going to try to put cannons on the Charleston Peninsula here to bombard the city, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But before that, the crisis of the colonies with the Intolerable Acts have led to a meeting of delegates from all the 13 colonies in what is known as the Second Continental Congress. And they've met before when a lot of the crisis first started years before, but this is the second time they're going to gather together. Even after hearing about the battles of Lexington and Concord, they still are going to attempt a peace offer with the king, known as the Olive Branch Petition, and Olive Branch is a universal symbol of peace. So they try this one last-ditch effort to try to prevent an all-out war with Great Britain, knowing full well how powerful Great Britain was and how difficult a war with them would have been. So that was their last kind of effort to declare or to keep peace. It ultimately failed, of course. The king never even read it, but knowing that war was a possibility, John Adams of Boston and Massachusetts is going to propose a continental army. And he appoints, or I should say, nominates George Washington to be the commander. And this was really important for a couple of reasons. One, George Washington has, of course, the military experience. In fact, he's the only person who's shown up every day to the Continental Congress dressed in a military uniform. He's well respected. He has the look of a leader. He's tall. He has excellent presence about him. He's very, very wealthy. He's very, very famous. But also, he's from Virginia. And up to this point, this had really been a Boston, Massachusetts, New England thing. But by appointing someone from Virginia, the most powerful state and a southern state, now it's kind of bringing the South into it as well, because they can't really go against the vote of a Continental Army if their guy is in charge. So he is going to be appointed, and kind of true to the form of George Washington that we'll talk about later. He's a very, very humble man. He merely states, "I do not think myself equal to this task," but he promises to do his best. So he's actually going to lead the Continental Congress, and he's going to go to Boston to assume control of the troops. But before he gets there, they're going to fight the Battle of Bunker Hill. So what happens is the Charleston Peninsula that I pointed out earlier has a couple hills on it. Now, initially the plan was to occupy Bunker Hill here, hence where the battle gets his name, but at the last second, Colonel Prescott, who was in charge, actually fortifies Breed's Hill. So Battle of Bunker Hill actually happens on Breed's Hill. It was a little bit closer to Boston. He thought it was a better position to bombard the city. So over the course of a night, they wheel cannon up there. They try to dig some entrenchments to protect themselves. The British see this happening, so they're going to send out a naval force to open fire on the hill. But because they're pretty well positioned, there's not much effect to that. So the British realize they need to send troops to dislodge the soldiers that way. So they're going to land soldiers on Charleston Peninsula, and they're going to march up the hill to dislodge the colonists. Now, the colonists have superior positioning, but they don't have much ammunition. They don't have very good equipment yet. So as the British are marching up, Colonel Prescott, supposedly, we don't know exactly who gave this order, but it's often attributed to him, gives the order, "Do not fire till you see the whites of their eyes." So allow the British to get really, really close before you open fire to make sure the shots are as accurate and effective as possible. And sure enough, the British march up the hill. The colonists wait and finally open fire To devastating effect, the British are driven back down the hill. They reform, they march up once again. Once again, the colonists wait, and they fire up a second time with similar results. Finally, the British reform a third time, march up the hill. At this point, the colonists have pretty well run out of ammunition and are forced to surrender the hill to the British. So their plan to bombard the city ultimately is a failure, and the British are able to capture the field. But in doing so, the British have suffered over 1,000 casualties, with far, far fewer from the colonists. So while this is a military victory for the British, it is a moral victory for the colonists, because they have inflicted heavy casualties on the British. And in fact, the British commander says many more victories like this will cost us the war. So these opening battles really show the determination of the colonists and the British marching up the hill to eventually be dislodged. Now, in the meantime, Washington shows up to find the army really in complete disarray. He was kind of in horror at the state of what could only be described as just a gaggle of people just kind of hanging around. It was by no means, in his opinion, a good army. So he has a pretty big task ahead of him, just whipping this army into shape. He is going to get a supply of cannons from a Fort Ticonderoga that had been captured by an American commander named General Knox. He takes those cannons to a place. Here's Boston. So occupying Charleston up here ultimately was not effective, but he takes these cannons to right here, a place called Dorchester Heights. And once he puts the cannons up there that can threaten the British Navy in the ocean here, the British realize that they are in a pretty dangerous position. If that Navy is destroyed, they are cut off. So the British get on their ships and they leave. And for a short time, the British are effectively kicked out of North America. Now, of course, they'll be back, but the first major engagement without firing a single shot, George Washington has checkmated the British into withdrawing from Boston, and it seems like a pretty good start. And with that, the Continental Congress is able to gain the necessary support for the Declaration of Independence. John Adams is the main figurehead pushing for independence, Benjamin Franklin, of course, as well, and he asks Thomas Jefferson to do the one to actually write the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence obviously was a document that formally separated us from England, but it was much more than that, and we'll go over it in greater detail later. But the Declaration of Independence is a statement of the rights of all men, and what the government owes the people. That the people don't owe the government exists simply to protect people's rights. And this, of course, is very, very important for America, and something that we still strive for to this day. So, the Declaration of Independence is signed July 4th, 1776, and we will leave off there, next talking about the Battle of